The call came while I was rinsing a cup at the sink, and the voice on the other end spoke with such polite certainty that I felt the air shift before I understood the words. A woman I had never met calmly said she was confirming my application for a large online casino credit line, repeating details I had never given and asking if I wished to increase the limit before approval. Her tone was gentle, almost kind, but it carried something else, too, something cold and rehearsed, as if she had delivered this same news to too many people who did not see the danger until it swallowed them whole. I remember the faint hum of the refrigerator behind me, the distant tapping sound from the hallway, and the quiet way my breath stalled in my chest, though I did not yet understand the meaning then. My name is Nora Bell. I am 74 years old, and this is my story. Before we continue, please tell me where you are watching from and subscribe to Her Legacy Tales, a place proving our best chapters can happen at any age. Now, back to the beginning. The woman on the phone waited patiently, as if she expected me to confirm every detail she had just listed. Her certainty unsettled me more than the information itself. I swallowed, feeling the dry edge of confusion tighten across my ribs. I told her I had never applied for anything of that nature. She paused only long enough to note it in her file, her voice lowering into something almost sympathetic. That soft shift in her tone stayed with me longer than her words, though I did not realize why in that moment. She said she would cancel the request and advised me to review any recent activity on my accounts. Then she thanked me, wished me a pleasant afternoon, and hung up as if she had not just opened a door I did not know existed. For a long moment, I stood completely still, my hand resting on the cool porcelain of the sink. The kitchen felt too quiet, too still, almost like the silence that settles after someone closes a book before the last page is read. I turned slowly toward the hallway, where I could hear a steady tapping sound. It was rhythmic, deliberate, and vaguely irritated, the kind of tapping someone does when they are waiting for something they believe should already be resolved. Tyler was leaning against the wall, his thumb moving across the screen of my phone with a practiced ease he had gained far too quickly. He did not look up when I stepped closer. His shoulders rose and fell with a soft sigh, the kind that carries impatience concealed beneath a surface of concern. He finally lifted his eyes, offering a small smile that never reached them. "That sounded confusing," he said in a tone meant to soothe me. "You know how these places are. They mix things up all the time." His voice was warm, but underneath it lived something sharper, a slight impatience that brushed against each word he spoke. I sensed it even then, though I could not yet name it. He tilted my phone toward me as if he were offering reassurance, though I noticed he did not hand it back. "Let me check a few things," he said, tapping the screen again. "You always get stressed with this stuff." The dismissal was subtle, almost affectionate, but it pressed against my chest in a way I did not expect. I had raised him to speak gently, but this gentleness did not feel like kindness. It felt like something practiced, something designed to guide me towards silence rather than understanding. He tapped through my notifications with quick, sure movements, turning the screen away from me each time he opened something new. He did it so smoothly that a part of me wondered how long this had been happening behind the edges of my attention. "I am not stressed," I said quietly, though I heard an unfamiliar tremor beneath the words. He gave a small laugh, barely audible, and shook his head with a warmth that somehow made me feel smaller instead of reassured. "You always say that," he murmured. "Just relax. You do not need to worry about every little thing." The words "every little thing" stayed with me longer than they should have. They were soft, almost playful, but they carried a slight sting, as if the details of my own life were trivial, burdensome, or no longer mine to manage. He spent several more minutes tapping and scrolling, occasionally sighing under his breath. Each sigh felt like a quiet reprimand, though I could not understand why. Finally, he handed the phone back to me, though he held it a moment longer than necessary, as though reluctant to release whatever control he had taken. "It was nothing," he said. "Probably a mistake from some place you used ages ago. You know how old info gets passed around. Old info, old habits, old ways, old me." The way he said the word old lingered in the air, even though he said it casually. I felt a faint tightening in my chest, a memory of the bank woman's gentle pity echoing in my mind. I wanted to ask him directly if he knew anything about the call, but something told me not to. His eyes held too much certainty, too much assumption about how I should respond. I sensed that if I questioned him now, he would dismiss it, laugh it off, or gently imply I was misremembering. Something in the way he held himself suggested he was preparing for such a moment, though I did not yet understand the purpose behind that preparation. Instead, I nodded and slipped the phone into my pocket. The movement felt heavier than it should have, as if the small device carried more than messages and numbers, as if it carried something I could not yet see. Tyler followed me into the kitchen, leaning on the counter in that familiar way of his, one hip propped, arms folded, expression relaxed, but watchful. He had been doing that often, settling nearby as though keeping an eye on me without openly saying so. He had moved in only weeks earlier, promising it would be temporary, promising he wanted to help me, to make things easier for me because technology is confusing and things are different these days. He said it with affection, but also with a tone that placed me somewhere below the level of understanding he believed he held. He glanced toward the sink where the cup still rested, his expression softening with practiced ease. "You should not worry yourself with strange phone calls," he said. "Let me handle anything that comes up. That is what I am here for." The words sounded caring, but they brushed against something in me that felt fragile, perhaps because I knew the truth. I had never asked him to handle anything. He had offered, insisted even. The few times I hesitated, he had laughed lightly and said I was making simple things harder than they needed to be. I wiped the counter thoughtfully, my hand moving in slow circles. I told myself I was imagining the tension, that he was trying to help, that the call was simply a mistake. Yet the air still felt unsettled, as though something invisible had shifted out of place. I had felt that same shift once before, years ago, on the day I learned my husband had been keeping a medical concern from me, not out of malice, but out of fear. I remembered standing in the same kitchen, feeling something delicate in the room tilt slightly, though I could not identify the cause until later. Tyler watched me in silence, his gaze following the movement of my hand. There was something possessive in the way he studied me, though I doubted he realized it. His shoulders relaxed once he saw I was not asking more questions. The corner of his mouth lifted into a small smile, the kind a person gives when they believe they have guided someone back into the lane they prefer. "You have always been a worrier," he said, shaking his head gently. "You do not need to be anymore." A strange quiet settled over the room after he said that. I felt it in my bones, in the slow cadence of my breath, in the slight pressure behind my ribs. It was a quiet that hinted at something hidden beneath the surface, something waiting to be revealed in its own time. I told myself it was just my imagination, but the truth is that some part of me recognized the danger already, even if I refused to acknowledge it then. Something in his tone, his certainty, his effortless dismissal of my concern, felt like a thread pulling at the edges of my life. I knew it even then, though I did not understand the full shape of the truth that waited ahead. He pushed off the counter, stretching lazily, as if the conversation had drained him more than it had affected me. He paused in the doorway. "I will order dinner later," he said. "I already linked the payment. You do not have to worry about that either." He said it casually, almost kindly, but the words brushed against a memory of my late husband sorting through bills at the kitchen table, making sure everything was in our name, everything understood, everything protected. My husband had always told me, "Clarity is kindness." Those words returned to me in a slow, quiet wave. Tyler disappeared down the hallway, leaving behind a faint echo of his earlier tapping. I stood alone in the kitchen, the air still carrying that strange heaviness. I looked at the phone in my pocket and felt a small shiver move through me, though the room was warm. Something was wrong. Something had already begun, and I had stepped into the middle of it without realizing how far it had gone. But I did not yet understand the meaning then. I have lived long enough to understand that unease rarely arrives loudly. It enters the room in small ways, brushing against ordinary moments, lingering at the edges of days that should feel simple. That is how it was with Tyler after he moved into my home. Nothing dramatic, nothing that could be pointed to as evidence, just a slow accumulation of shifts in tone, timing, and small responsibilities that drifted into his hands with little resistance. Looking back, I see every sign clearly, yet at the time each one felt too gentle to question, though I should have paid closer attention. He had arrived at my doorstep with a backpack and a weary slump to his shoulders, telling me he needed a place to breathe. Another job lost, another disappointment, another reminder that the world did not align with the plans he constantly made and rarely kept. I had raised him through the difficult years of his parents' bitter divorce, so there was a part of me that softened instantly the moment he stood in front of me. He looked tired, and the tiredness made him look younger than he was, reminding me of evenings long ago when he would fall asleep on my couch with crayons still in his hands. I let him come in. I did not hesitate, though perhaps I should have. I wanted to believe he only needed time, a warm bed, and a sense of stability that had always been fragile for him. He hugged me tightly that first night, promising he would contribute, promising he would help, promising he would be different now. Promises are delicate things. They can comfort, but they can also cloud the truth in ways that make it difficult to see what stands right in front of you. I did not yet understand which type of promise he had brought into my home. He settled into the guest room quickly, familiarizing himself with the drawers, the kitchen, the routines of the house. He complimented my cooking, praised the softness of the blankets, and said he had forgotten how peaceful the house felt. At first he was attentive, almost overly so, checking on me often, asking how I slept, offering to take over small chores. I remember feeling grateful in those early days, believing I was seeing a new side of him, a mature side that had been waiting for the right moment to emerge. Yet even then, there were small shifts that hinted at something I did not want to name. It began with my mail. One morning, I noticed him collecting it before I reached the door. He smiled when he handed it to me, but I saw he had already separated the envelopes, placing some to the side and offering only a few for me to open. I did not question it at the time. I assumed he was trying to help, trying to sort through the endless offers, statements, and notices that come to a house over decades. But then he began doing it every day, always a step ahead of me, always placing one group of letters on the counter and tucking another stack under his arm as he moved down the hallway. I told myself it was harmless, that he was merely organizing things for me, though a faint concern had begun pressing at the back of my mind even then. Small patterns continued. He took over the weekly grocery orders, insisting that the online forms were confusing and that he could handle them more efficiently. He told me he would keep track of things, so I would not feel overwhelmed. I remember watching him fill the virtual cart with items I had never purchased, brushing off my questions with a laugh and saying the store had sent him coupons. When I asked why the total was higher each week, he shook his head gently, reminding me that prices were rising everywhere. His voice was patient in tone but dismissive in meaning, though I did not see the full significance of that dismissal at the time. Another morning, I found my phone settings changed. Notifications off, brightness adjusted, certain apps moved out of sight. When I asked about it, he smiled and said I had probably clicked something by accident. His eyes softened in a way that suggested he believed the explanation would comfort me. but something in the back of my mind tightened, not because of the settings themselves, but because of the ease with which he assumed I would accept being gently corrected. I began telling myself I was imagining things, even though the unease was growing quietly with each passing day. Packages began arriving almost weekly, items I had not ordered, addressed in my name, with return addresses that meant nothing to me. Tyler always intercepted them first, carrying them inside before I could reach the door. He opened them in the living room, glancing at each item, then folding the boxes neatly. When I asked where the items came from, he offered explanations that varied slightly each time. At first, he said they were replacements for household supplies. Then he said he was testing new kitchen gadgets for me. Then he claimed they were part of a rewards program. Each explanation sounded casual, but something about his tone felt practiced, as if he had rehearsed these responses long before I asked the question. There were moments he would tilt his head and smile in a way that made me feel foolish for doubting him. That smile had always worked on me when he was younger. It still worked, though it should not have. I remember standing beside the sofa one afternoon, holding a small package addressed to me. He took it from my hands with a light touch, telling me he would take care of it, that I should not strain myself with unnecessary tasks. His voice was gentle, but something about the gesture felt like he was removing more than an object from my hands. It felt like he was slowly removing parts of my life, one small responsibility at a time. As the days passed, I noticed the numbers in my bank account shifting in ways that did not match my usual spending. Small amounts at first, subtle enough that a person distracted by daily routines might not immediately notice. But I was not distracted. I watched the balance quietly, making mental notes, though I did not confront him. I wanted to believe there was a reasonable explanation, a forgotten bill, a renewal I had neglected, something simple, something harmless. Yet there was a growing awareness inside me that something was slipping out of my grasp. That awareness hummed softly in the back of my mind, though I did not yet have the words for it. Tyler began making slight jokes about my memory, harmless comments, or so they seemed. He would shake his head and smile softly when I asked a question he felt should have been clear. He would tap my phone screen lightly, saying I must have forgotten how to navigate something. He called me old school with a warm laugh, the way people do when they mean to make light of something but reveal more than they intend. I found myself questioning small details because he implied I should. A misplaced key, a forgotten note, a password I was sure I remembered correctly. Each time he reassured me with a tone that suggested I was fragile. The reassurance was not comforting, it was diminishing, though I did not yet recognize how intentionally it was delivered. One evening, he stood beside the dining table, tapping through my email. He said he was organizing things for me, but I watched him delete messages I had not read. He told me they were junk, unnecessary clutter, things I did not need to concern myself with. His fingers moved quickly, confidently, as if he had been managing my correspondence for far longer than a few weeks. I stood in the doorway, feeling as if I were intruding on my own life, though I could not explain why. There were other moments, too, subtle comments about my prescriptions, observations about my routines that felt strangely detailed, as if he were tracking them. He mentioned, in a tone of casual affection, that people my age sometimes forgot little things and that he was there to help. The way he said "my age" settled heavily in the space between us. I felt a flicker of discomfort, faint but unmistakable. I carried that discomfort with me into the quiet hours of the night, though I tried to convince myself it was nothing more than misplaced worry. Then there was the moment that should have warned me more clearly than it did. I had just finished sorting some laundry when Tyler stepped into the room with his phone in hand. He was typing quickly, pausing only long enough to glance at me with an expression I could not decipher. I asked him if everything was all right. He smiled and waved dismissively. "Just handling something," he said. "You do not need to worry." The phrase, "you do not need to worry," had become almost a refrain by then. He used it whenever I asked a question he preferred not to answer. Each repetition felt like a thread being pulled tighter around me. His tone remained warm, but beneath the warmth lived a subtle firmness, as if he were guiding me toward a smaller space, slowly and without announcing it. There were nights I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the faint glow of the street lamp casting soft patterns above me. I thought about Tyler's parents, about how fractured their lives had been, and about how often I had been the steady place for him when everything else felt unstable. I reminded myself that he had always been a child who struggled with boundaries, who drifted between responsibilities, who needed guidance. But I also remembered that he had always loved me, or at least I believed he had. That belief clouded my judgment in ways I only recognized later. The next day, I found him in the living room, sitting with my laptop open in front of him. He looked up quickly, almost startled, then smiled in a way that did not entirely reach his eyes. He said he was updating some things for me, adjusting settings, renewing subscriptions, organizing files. His voice was smooth, practiced, the words flowing easily. I asked what needed updating. He told me the details would confuse me, that he would handle everything. He closed the laptop gently, placing his hand on top of it as if blocking my access without ever appearing to do so. Something shifted in my chest then, a quiet, almost imperceptible shift, but one that pressed against the edges of my breath. I remembered the phone call from the bank, the packages, the mail, the disappearing notifications. I remembered the small withdrawals, the altered routines, the soft corrections, the gently dismissive laughs. They formed a pattern I still could not fully see, but I felt the edges of it brushing against me. He began speaking about bills more often, telling me he needed certain passwords to make things easier. He spoke with authority, as though he had already been managing these tasks for a long time. When I hesitated, he chuckled softly and said he was only trying to help. He often added that people my age did not need to complicate things by trying to keep up with modern systems. I smiled weakly, though something in me tightened. His tone carried a new edge, one I had not noticed before. The truth is that sometimes manipulation does not feel like manipulation. It feels like care wrapped in concern. It feels like help delivered with a smile. It feels like someone stepping closer while slowly moving you away from the center of your own life. That is what those weeks felt like. A slow, careful erasing disguised as support, though I did not yet understand the meaning of the pattern forming around me. It was the way he watched me move around the house that finally unsettled me. Not openly, not with suspicion or irritation. It was quieter than that. He watched me the way someone watches a door, waiting to see if it will open or stay shut. A soft monitoring that did not fit the grandson I had raised. A grandson who used to place his small hand in mine and ask if I thought he would grow brave. I had told him he already was. But bravery can take many forms, and so can certainty. He began stepping into rooms unannounced, standing in doorways without speaking, observing before engaging. Each time he did it, I felt something blink inside me, as if a small warning light had flickered and gone out again. I tried to ignore it, convincing myself that shared spaces required shared movement, though the unease did not fade. If anything, it grew sharper, quieter, and more persistent. One morning, as I stood making tea, he reached past me to grab a mug, his hand brushing the edge of my shoulder in a way that felt more claiming than affectionate. He smiled, but the smile felt rehearsed. He spoke about reorganizing some of my financial files, saying he had noticed certain things were outdated. He spoke with the confidence of someone who believed his role in my life had shifted, though I did not recall giving him that authority. I nodded along, though inside me, something steadied itself without my conscious instruction. A slow, quiet anchoring, a subtle awareness that I needed to watch him as closely as he watched me. It was not fear exactly. It was clarity beginning to take shape, though only in its earliest form. The weeks passed. The patterns deepened, the unease curled itself into the corners of my days, and each night when I lay down to rest, I felt a quiet voice inside me whisper that something was unfolding in the shadows of my own home, something I had not yet named. I wish I could say I recognized the truth then, but I did not. Not yet. I only sensed that the ground beneath me had begun to shift, though the full meaning of that shift had not yet revealed itself. There are moments in life that arrive so quietly you almost miss them, yet they end up reshaping everything that follows. My moment came on an afternoon that should have been ordinary. The sun sat softly across my living room rug, the house humming with the kind of stillness that usually comforts me. But the stillness felt different that day, almost expectant, as if the walls themselves sensed something I had not yet seen. I moved through the room with a slow intentionality, feeling the weight of my own thoughts settling around me, though I did not fully understand what they were trying to warn me of. It began when I tried to check one of my bank statements. The website refused to accept the password I had used for years. I tried another one, then another, all familiar to my hands, all rejected. A faint pressure tightened behind my ribs. I reminded myself it could be a technical error. Passwords sometimes expire, systems sometimes shift, yet the unease grew sharper, more insistent, like the soft flick of a light in a dark room. I typed one last combination, and again the access was denied. I sat still for a moment, staring at the screen, feeling a thin veil of understanding begin to lift. I called Tyler's name, my voice quieter than I intended. He appeared in the doorway a few breaths later, leaning casually against the frame as though he had been expecting me to call for him. "What is going on?" I asked. "My password is not working." He walked toward me with a measured calm, placing his hand on the back of my chair. His expression held the same soft reassurance he always used when correcting me. "You probably typed something wrong," he said. "Let me take a look." His fingers moved quickly across the keyboard. Too quickly, as though he knew exactly what he was looking for. He tried a few combinations I did not recognize, and the system accepted one of them immediately. He leaned back, offering a smile that was meant to comfort, but it did not reach the center of his eyes. "See," he said, "all fixed." "What password did you use?" I asked. He paused for the briefest moment, a pause so small it might have escaped notice on any other day. Then he shrugged lightly. "Just one of the backups we set up," he said. "You do not need to remember all the details. That is why I take care of these things." His tone was warm, but his eyes flickered with something else, something more guarded, more calculating. I did not know what to call it then, but I felt it. I felt it in the back of my throat, in the slow tightening of my chest. A quiet alarm flickered inside me. It was faint, but it was there. He closed the screen before I could see the numbers. "Everything looks fine," he said. "Do not worry yourself." He left the room before I could respond. His steps were light, but the echo they left behind felt heavy. Later that afternoon, I walked over to my neighbor's house. Her granddaughter, a bright and patient young woman, was home from college for a few days. She had helped me with small technical things before, always explaining them carefully, never once making me feel foolish. When I stepped into their living room, she greeted me with a warm smile. "Mrs. Bell, do you need help with something?" she asked. I hesitated, embarrassed to admit the truth, though I was not sure what the truth was yet. "I think something is wrong with my accounts," I said quietly. "Could you help me look at my credit report? I want to be sure everything is all right." She nodded immediately. "Of course, we can do that." She opened her laptop and guided me through the steps. I watched her fingers move across the keys with the same confidence Tyler's had, but her expression was open, unhurried, entirely without condescension. When the results loaded, her face shifted subtly. Her brows drew together, her eyes narrowing in confusion. She clicked one tab, then another. "Mrs. Bell," she said slowly, "did you open these accounts?" She turned the screen toward me. There were names of companies I had never heard of, credit cards with high limits, gambling platforms, payment apps, a cluster of activities spread across the last several weeks. "No," I whispered. "I have never used any of these." She exhaled softly, her expression troubled. "These were opened recently?" she said. "All in your name." The room felt colder suddenly, though the air had not changed. I placed a hand on the table to steady myself. She clicked into one of the accounts, and my stomach tightened as I saw transaction after transaction I had never made, a pattern of withdrawals, charges from places I had never visited. It felt like reading a stranger's life laid over my own. She hesitated again. "I'm going to check the linked email," she said gently, "just in case." She navigated quickly and found a folder of confirmations. As she clicked through them, she stopped on one message. Her face changed, not with shock, but with a somber understanding. She read it, then looked at me with a quiet seriousness. "Mrs. Bell, I think you should see this." She turned the screen toward me again. The email was short. A message from Tyler to someone I did not know. In it, he joked about how easy everything was, how simple it was to open accounts under my name. Then the line that shifted something inside me entirely. "If it all blows up, I will just tell them she is slipping. They always believe that." The sentence cut through me with a slow, controlled cruelty, the kind that does not raise its voice, the kind that wounds quietly and deeply. I felt my breath catch, not from surprise, but from recognition. All the small moments, the dismissive comments, the altered passwords, the intercepted mail, the gentle corrections, aligned in a pattern I could finally see clearly. My confusion dissolved into something sharp, not anger, not fear, something steadier, something that made the room feel suddenly smaller and sharper, as if the edges of the truth had clicked into place. I leaned back slowly, my palms resting against my knees. "I understand," I said softly. "Thank you." She placed a careful hand on my arm. "Mrs. Bell, do you want me to call someone?" "No," I said, my voice quiet but certain. "Not yet." A strange calm settled inside me, colder than shock but steadier than fear. It was the kind of calm that comes when a person has finally seen what has been happening beneath the surface. A calm that does not fade because it has taken root. I walked home slowly, each step measured. The sky was dimming, the early evening light stretching long shadows across the path. I noticed those shadows more keenly than usual. They overlapped gently, almost like the layers of deception I had just uncovered. My hand remained steady on the railing as I took the porch steps, though my stomach still felt tight. Inside, the house smelled faintly of something Tyler was cooking. A rich scent, warm and comforting, yet it settled uneasily in my throat. I walked through the living room, pausing at the edge of the kitchen doorway. He stood with his back to me, humming softly, stirring a pot with slow, relaxed movements. He turned slightly when he sensed me behind him. "Hey," he said, smiling, "you are just in time. I made something you like." I watched him carefully, taking in the small details I had overlooked before. The casual confidence, the ease in his voice, the assumption that he still held the role he had carved out. He stepped closer, placing a hand on my arm with that familiar, gentle pressure. "You look tired," he said softly. "Everything all right?" His voice sounded caring, too caring, carefully caring. Care measured to match the version of myself he believed he was gradually creating. "I am fine," I said. My voice was calm, almost serene. "Just needed some air." He nodded and returned to the stove. I stood for a moment longer, watching the way he moved, the way he hummed, the way he inhabited my home. The truth sat heavily inside me, like a stone placed gently but deliberately in the palm of my hand. I asked him one question, the only one I was willing to speak aloud. "Tyler," I said softly, "have you been using my information for anything?" He froze only for a fraction of a second, so brief that someone less observant might have missed it. Then he laughed lightly, shaking his head. "What? Of course not," he said. "Why would you think that?" His tone was easy, but the hesitation, small as it was, settled everything for me. I nodded slowly, letting the silence between us stretch. His laugh faded, and he turned back to the stove. I walked away quietly, my steps light, my breath even. I returned to my bedroom and closed the door softly, not to shut him out, but to let the truth settle in the space around me. I sat at the edge of my bed, my hands folded neatly in my lap. The house felt different now, not dangerous, not threatening, simply revealed. The shift inside me was subtle but irrevocable. The woman who had walked into my neighbor's house that afternoon had been confused and hesitant. The woman who sat on the edge of her bed now was neither. A quiet steadiness filled me, a clarity I had delayed for too long, a resolve I had not needed in years. I realized then that Tyler had not underestimated my memory. He had underestimated me, and that misunderstanding would change everything that followed, though he did not yet understand the meaning of the shift forming inside me. There is a particular stillness that arrives after the truth settles, not the shock of discovery, not the ache of betrayal, but the calm that follows, a calm that is not peace, but clarity. That was the feeling that wrapped itself around me in the days after I learned what Tyler had done. It was not anger that guided me. It was not fear. It was something quieter, something more deliberate, a careful awakening of the part of myself that had survived a lifetime of challenges and refused to be reduced by any of them. I moved through the house differently after that. I walked with a softer step, not to hide from him, but to observe without disturbing the air around me. I watched the way he used my spaces, the way he moved from room to room with the confidence of someone who believed his hold on my life was secure. I saw the ease with which he handled my devices, the quick taps on my phone, the quiet adjustments he made on my laptop. He no longer tried to hide those movements. He believed he did not need to. That belief became my advantage. The first thing I did was gather every piece of mail he had tucked away. I waited until he left for a walk one afternoon. I heard the soft click of the front door, then the fading sound of his footsteps on the sidewalk. Only then did I open the drawer he always used to sort through the letters he never meant for me to see. Inside, I found more envelopes than I had expected. Statements, alerts, confirmations, some unopened, others slit carefully along the edge. I placed them in a neat stack on the kitchen table. I did not rush. I opened each one slowly, smoothing the paper with my fingertips, reading every line with a patience that felt like strength rather than fragility. Each page held another piece of the puzzle. Transactions in places I had never been, balances that did not belong to me, language that hinted at overdue notices and credit extensions. I laid the pages out in rows. The table looked like a quiet battlefield of ink and dates. Evidence, though I had not yet begun to call it that. When Tyler returned, I was back in the living room with a book in my lap. He did not suspect anything. He hummed as he moved through the house, his footsteps easy, unaware that the shift inside me had already begun. The next step required more precision. I returned to the neighbor's house the following day, holding a small notebook I had used for grocery lists. The granddaughter greeted me at the door again, her expression warm and unhurried. "Do you need help with something else?" she asked gently. "Yes," I said. "I need to understand how to document things properly." She nodded, understanding far more than my words alone conveyed. She guided me again to her laptop. We went through the credit report in detail this time, line by line. She explained the difference between inquiry alerts, new accounts, and changes made without authorization. She showed me how to request printed copies of reports from all major bureaus. She explained how fraud alerts worked. Her voice remained calm, patient, respectful. I wrote everything down in my notebook. Not in long explanations, but in short, precise points, dates, company names, words she said I would need later. She never asked why I needed the information. She did not have to. We printed several pages and she handed them to me in a small folder. I held it carefully, feeling its weight settle into my hands, a weight that felt like protection rather than burden. "Mrs. Bell," she said softly, "if you need someone to go with you anywhere, I can ask my mom." I smiled, touched by her kindness. "Thank you," I said. "I may need that soon." When I returned home, Tyler was sitting at the kitchen counter with his phone. He looked up briefly, scanning my face, then returned to whatever he was typing. His lack of awareness told me everything I needed to know. He still believed he was guiding me instead of being quietly watched. That evening, I sat in my bedroom sorting the documents into a clean folder I had taken from my desk drawer. I arranged them by date. I highlighted certain lines. I tucked my notes between the pages where they would be most useful. I moved slowly, methodically, with the calm certainty of someone preparing for something she had no intention of rushing. A small voice inside me whispered that this folder would become the turning point. I listened to that voice carefully. Over the next several days, I observed Tyler with greater focus. The changes in him were small but unmistakable now that I knew what to look for. He checked his phone with increased frequency. He moved through the house with an alertness that had not been there before. He started asking if I needed anything more often, though his tone suggested he was making sure I had not discovered anything. One morning, as I walked past the bathroom, I heard him on the phone. His voice was low, but not low enough to conceal the edge of worry threading through it. "I will figure it out," he said. "She does not understand any of this anyway." His words were not loud. They were not cruel. They were simply confident in a lie he believed could still shield him. I did not confront him. I simply added the moment to the growing file inside my mind. Later that week, I went to the bank quietly, carrying the folder in my purse. I asked to speak with a clerk about some confusion with recent activity. The young man who sat across from me had a careful, attentive expression. He listened as I explained the situation in general terms, never once looking at me with the condescension Tyler often used. "May I see what you brought with you?" he asked. I laid the folder on the desk. He opened it gently, reviewing each page. His expression shifted gradually from curiosity to concern. He asked me soft, careful questions, making sure not to overwhelm me. "Mrs. Bell," he said, "these accounts were not opened correctly, and some of these signatures, they do not match." His words were steady, not dramatic, but they carried a weight that settled deeply in my chest. "I thought so," I said quietly. He nodded. "Would you like to file an identity theft report? I can help start the process. We do this often." The word "often" lingered with me, a quiet acknowledgement that this kind of betrayal was not rare, that others had walked into this same room carrying their own folders, their own quiet shock. "Yes," I said, "I would like to begin." He printed forms for me to review. He highlighted the sections I needed to sign. His tone remained calm, never rushing me, never assuming I would not understand. I appreciated his steadiness. It reminded me that dignity is preserved as much by tone as by action. When I left the bank, the folder in my purse held copies of the forms, confirmation numbers, and a list of next steps. I walked to my car with a slowness that felt deliberate. The sky was pale and soft, and the air carried the faint scent of something blooming nearby. I breathed it in, feeling both older and steadier than I had felt in a long time. That evening, Tyler asked where I had been. "I took a walk," I said calmly. He watched me carefully for a few breaths. "You know you should tell me when you leave," he said. "It worries me." There was a softness to his voice, but also an authority that did not belong in the mouth of someone who had spent the last weeks misusing my trust. I simply nodded, offering no explanation beyond that. He stepped closer, placing a hand lightly on my shoulder. "I am just looking out for you," he said. I met his eyes with a steady calm I had not used with him before. "I know," I said softly. Something flickered in his expression. A small shift, uncertainty. He withdrew his hand slowly, his smile loosening at the edges. I spent the next 2 days placing calls from my bedroom with the door closed. I contacted credit bureaus and requested freezes. I spoke with representatives who guided me through the steps. I confirmed which accounts were mine and which were fraudulent. I changed passwords. I updated contact information. Each call was another piece of the puzzle falling back into place. Though I did not yet reveal any of this to Tyler, he became more restless as the week went on. He checked the mail with more urgency. He hovered around my devices. He asked more questions about my day. He watched me the way a person watches a window during a storm, unsure if the glass will hold. Every detail he revealed through his anxiety became another quiet note in my documentation. One afternoon, I entered the living room unexpectedly and found him bent over my phone again. He straightened quickly, smiling too quickly. "Just checking your messages," he said. "You missed a few." I stepped closer, standing with a calmness he did not anticipate. "I can handle that," I said. He blinked, taken aback. "You can?" "Yes," I said. "I remember how." My voice was quiet, but something in the way I said it unsettled him. He held the phone for a moment longer, as if reluctant to return it, then placed it in my hand very gently. If he suspected anything, he did not voice it, but I saw it in his eyes. A small ripple of doubt, a tremor in the confidence he had worn so comfortably. I spent the next evening organizing every document again. I added notes. I tucked additional copies behind the main reports. I placed the entire folder into a larger envelope, sealing it carefully. I placed that envelope inside my purse and then placed a second set of copies in a drawer he never used. By the time I finished, the room felt different, fuller, more grounded, as though every page I had organized had reclaimed a piece of my life. Tyler moved through the hallway as I closed the drawer. "Everything all right?" he asked. "Yes," I said softly. "Everything is all right now." He smiled, but the uncertainty in his eyes grew slightly deeper. He did not understand the meaning then, but I did. The morning of the confrontation arrived without ceremony. The sky was muted, the air cool, the house wrapped in the kind of calm that often settles before a long-awaited conversation. I woke with a clarity that felt different from the days before, not sharper, not colder, simply settled, as though the decision had already been made somewhere deep within me a long time ago, and I was only now stepping into the moment meant for it. I moved through my morning routine quietly, letting the stillness sit with me. Tyler was already awake, pacing softly in the hallway, his steps light but restless. He glanced toward me when I crossed the room, searching my face for some indication of what I was thinking. He did not find it. "You are up early," he said lightly. "So are you," I replied. He laughed under his breath, though the sound lacked ease. "Just could not sleep." It was the first admission that hinted at his growing unease, though he tried to mask it with a stretch of his arms and a casual shrug. I nodded and stepped past him, my hand resting a moment on the back of a dining chair as I breathed in the morning's quiet. I told him I needed to go to the bank to sort out a small confusion. I used a tone so steady it left him no argument to latch onto. He blinked once, then again, as if sifting through possible reasons to accompany me. "I can come with you if you want," he offered. "No," I said gently. "I would like to go alone." My voice carried no warning, no edge, only calm independence. That calm unsettled him more than any anger would have. He hesitated, then nodded, stepping aside. "All right," he said. "Call me if you need anything." I gave a polite nod, picked up my purse, and left the house. The folder inside felt heavier than paper should, but in a way that comforted rather than burdened me. Each document was a quiet truth, gathered deliberately, waiting to be spoken only when necessary. The bank was quiet when I arrived. A few people sat in chairs against the wall, reading or scrolling through their phones. The clerk who had helped me before recognized me instantly. His name was Mr. Hayes, though I had not used it aloud before this day. He greeted me with a steady nod, his eyes kind, his voice respectful. "Mrs. Bell," he said, "are you ready to continue the process?" "Yes," I said. "I am." He led me to a small office at the back, away from the busyness of the front counters. The room was simple. 2 chairs, a desk, a computer that hummed softly. Nothing dramatic, nothing staged. It was exactly the environment required for the kind of truth I needed to place into the open. I placed the folder on the desk. He opened it with the same carefulness he had shown before. He reviewed my notes, the printed statements, the alerts, and the recorded timeline. His expression did not shift dramatically. Instead, it tightened with understanding, then softened with something close to sympathy. "Everything you have documented is consistent," he said. "We will proceed with the next steps." I nodded. The quiet felt like a companion rather than a weight. "I will need a witness for the formal statement," he added. I looked toward the doorway where a woman in a navy blouse stood waiting. She stepped inside when he gestured to her. She carried a clipboard and offered me a warm smile, the kind of smile that reassures without pressing. "This will take a few minutes," she said. Her voice was soft, steady. She sat beside me as Mr. Hayes began asking questions in a tone designed to guide, not overwhelm. "Did you open any of these accounts?" he asked. "No." "Did you authorize anyone to open them on your behalf?" "No." "Have you given power of attorney to anyone in the past year?" "No." "Has anyone had access to your personal information recently?" I paused, the only pause in the entire process. "Yes," I said. He didn't ask who. He didn't press. Not yet. The witness wrote something down with slow, deliberate strokes. Mr. Hayes continued. "When did you first notice unusual activity?" "A few weeks ago," I said. "As documented here?" he asked, tapping the folder. "Yes," I replied. "And were you aware of these transactions at the time they occurred?" "No." His movements were calm, methodical. He typed notes as I spoke, pausing only to confirm details. It didn't feel like an interrogation. It felt like unveiling a pattern with each quiet answer. When the statement was complete, he printed a final document. He slid it toward me, along with a pen. "This is the official identity theft acknowledgement. Please read it carefully before signing." I read it slowly, letting each line settle. When I finished, I laid my hand gently on the paper for a moment, not to hesitate, simply to acknowledge the gravity of it. Then I signed my name with a steadiness that surprised even me. He signed his portion afterward, then the witness signed hers. "It is now documented," he said softly. The finality of the statement did not startle me. It felt like an exhale I had been holding for too long. He stood politely. "Would you like to call someone, or would you prefer privacy?" "I will call someone later," I said, "but not him." He understood immediately. I sat for a moment longer, allowing the stillness of the room to surround me. When I finally stood, I felt a shift inside me. Not a jolt, not a surge, but a steady grounding, as though the floor beneath my feet had grown stronger. As I walked out of the bank, Tyler was standing near the entrance, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed. His face tightened the moment he saw me. He had arrived faster than I expected. Perhaps he had followed, or perhaps his restlessness had driven him to check on me. "There you are," he said, forcing a small laugh. "I thought you might need help." I met his eyes, calm, steady, entirely unmoved. "I managed," I said. He stepped closer. "What did they say? Is everything all right?" His voice carried a thin thread of tension, wrapped carefully in concern. He searched my face for answers I did not offer. "It is handled," I said. The words were simple. but they shifted something in him instantly. "Handled?" he repeated. "Yes." He opened his mouth as if to ask another question, but I walked past him, moving toward the sidewalk with a steadiness that left no space for argument. He followed a few steps behind me, his breath uneven. "Nora, what is going on?" I didn't respond. There was nothing left to explain. The explanation now lived in documents, signatures, witness statements, and bank confirmations, not in conversations he would attempt to twist. He reached my side, lowering his voice. "If this is about money, I can fix it. I can explain things." "No," I said quietly, stopping just long enough to meet his eyes. "You cannot." The softness of my voice unsettled him more than anger would have. He swallowed, the movement stiff. "I did nothing wrong. I did not correct him. I did not accuse him. I did not raise my voice. Instead, I spoke with the quiet certainty of someone who had finally reclaimed her place in her own life. "The bank has everything they need," I said. "It is out of my hands now." His face drained slowly of color. You reported me." "I reported what happened," I said. The distinction mattered. For both of us. He stepped back, shaking his head. "You do not understand what you have done." "I understand exactly," I replied. My voice was steady, controlled, entirely without malice. He stared at me, searching for a version of me he could still manipulate. He did not find it. I walked toward the car without looking back. He remained on the sidewalk, one hand raised slightly as though reaching toward something that had already slipped out of his grasp. Before starting the engine, I looked at him through the window. His posture was tense, his expression scattered beneath the weight of consequences he had not anticipated. He had planned for my confusion. He had not planned for my clarity. I drove away, leaving him standing there with the knowledge that the truth no longer belonged to him. It belonged to the paper, the signatures, the records, the calm voice of a clerk who had listened, the witness who had seen, the system he believed he could manipulate through me. He did not understand the meaning then, but I did. And that difference was the quiet justice I had been waiting to deliver. The days that followed unfolded with a stillness I had not expected. Not the stillness of shock, nor the stillness that comes from waiting for something to unravel. It was a different kind of quiet, steady, grounded, almost tender in its own way. The kind of quiet that settles into a house once the truth has been spoken aloud, leaving no need for further explanation. I moved through each morning with a calm I had not felt in years, waking before the sun, letting the early light spill softly across the floorboards as though it, too, understood the change taking place within me. I found that I breathed differently, more evenly, more deliberately. There was no tension hiding beneath my ribs, no lingering doubt pressing at the back of my mind. I was not waiting for the next small sign of manipulation, nor bracing myself for another gentle dismissal. The house felt mine again, not because of anything dramatic I had done, but because of what I had finally allowed myself to see. Tyler stayed quiet after the bank incident. He did not apologize. He did not defend himself. He simply drifted around the house like a restless shadow, moving from room to room with an unease that grew heavier each day. I watched him without speaking. I did not accuse him. I did not argue. The truth already belonged to the paper I had signed, and there was nothing he could add or take away from it. One evening, he stood in the doorway of the living room as I folded a blanket on the sofa. His voice was softer than usual, grounded not in confidence, but in something closer to fear. "Are you going to tell people?" he asked. I looked up at him slowly. "People do not need to know," I said. "Only the ones who can correct the damage." He exhaled, relieved, but unsettled. I did not mean for any of it to get out of hand. His words drifted through the air between us, landing with no weight. I did not respond. There was nothing to say that would ease his discomfort, and nothing he could offer that would ease the quiet ache I carried. He waited for me to fill the silence, but when I didn't, He nodded faintly and walked away, his footsteps heavy against the floor. In the following days, he spent more time outside the house, longer walks, later evenings, occasional nights spent elsewhere. When he returned, he moved cautiously, watching me the way a child watches a closed door, unsure whether it will open or remain shut forever. I remained steady, polite, calm. I answered his questions when necessary, but offered nothing more. Distance grew slowly at first, then more noticeably, until one morning I realized his presence no longer shaped the rhythm of my days. That realization felt like a soft wash of peace. I filled my time with small tasks that had long been neglected: sorting drawers, watering the plants more regularly, rearranging the books on the shelves. The house responded to my attention like an old friend relieved to be remembered. Even the air felt clearer, unburdened by unspoken tension. I spent an afternoon at the kitchen table working through the final list of steps Mr. Hayes had given me. I contacted the bureaus again, confirming that the freeze remained in place. I called the companies associated with the fraudulent accounts, speaking with representatives who guided me kindly through each verification. Their voices were patient and reassuring, never once rushing me, never once speaking down to me. Each call closed another door Tyler had tried to open through my name. When I finished, I placed the final confirmation letter in the folder. I smoothed the pages carefully, then slid it into the drawer of my desk with a quiet sense of completion. Not triumph, not victory, completion. The following morning, Tyler approached me with a hesitant expression. He stood with his hands in his pockets, shifting slightly as though unsure of his own posture. "I have been thinking," he said quietly. "Maybe it is time I find my own place." I folded the dish towel I had been holding and set it down beside the sink. "That is a good idea," I said. He nodded, caught off guard by my agreement. "I mean, it might take some time." "You will manage," I replied. He opened his mouth, searching for something to say, then closed it again. The silence stretched. He looked around the kitchen as though seeing it differently than before. For a moment, he looked younger, almost like the boy I used to guide through homework and bedtime routines, the boy who once trusted me without calculation. But that version of him existed only in memory. He left 2 days later. No dramatic moment. No raised voices, no emotional outpouring. He packed quietly, moving through the house with a tenderness that felt strangely misplaced. He folded his clothes slowly, as though he wanted to give the moment more significance than it could hold. "I will call you," he said at the door. I nodded. "Take care of yourself." He hesitated, then stepped outside. The door closed with a soft click, neither harsh nor sentimental. Just final. The house sighed around me, settling into a new stillness. I stood in the hallway for a breath, then walked to the kitchen and filled the kettle. The water warmed with a soft hum, and I felt an unexpected sense of gratitude wash through me. Gratitude for the clarity I had gained, gratitude for the strength I had not realized I still possessed. Gratitude for the chance to choose myself again after years of choosing others. In the weeks that followed, I took slow walks around the neighborhood. The trees looked different in those days, brighter, fuller, somehow more honest. Perhaps they had always looked that way, and I had simply been too distracted to notice. I greeted neighbors I had not spoken to in months, shared small conversations about gardens and weather, and listened to stories without feeling the weight of anything hidden pressing against my chest. One afternoon, I sat on the porch and watched the world settle into the soft glow of early evening. I felt no anger toward Tyler. The ache was still there, faint but present, like a bruise that remained tender after the impact had already passed. But beneath that ache lived something deeper, an understanding that forgiveness and reconciliation are not the same thing. I could hold compassion for who he had been without inviting him back into the spaces he had misused. The decision to revise my will came quietly. I did not announce it. I did not seek affirmation. I simply walked into the lawyer's office one morning with the same folder I had shown the bank. The lawyer greeted me with a respectful nod, sensing the seriousness without my needing to explain. "I would like to update some things," I said. He listened as I explained my wishes, calmly, firmly, without bitterness. When we finished, he read the changes back to me. My belongings, my small savings, the home I had held together for decades, none of it would pass to the person who had used my name as currency. Instead, it would support organizations devoted to grandparents raising children alone, people who carried the weight I had once carried, people who needed strength and resources without strings attached. When I signed the new document, I felt a softness in my chest, not triumph, not revenge, just an alignment of truth with intention, a restoration of something I thought I had lost. Walking out of that office, the sunlight brushed my shoulders like a quiet reassurance. I breathed in deeply, letting the warm air fill my lungs. My steps felt lighter, more grounded, as though the earth beneath me had shifted into a steadier foundation. The next time Tyler called, his number appeared on my phone with a silence that felt heavy. I let it ring, not out of anger, but out of choice. A choice to protect my peace, a choice I had denied myself for too long. I listened to the final ring fade into quiet, then placed the phone on the table. In the stillness that followed, I felt no guilt, only calm, only clarity, only the quiet strength that comes when a woman finally decides that her well-being is not a burden, but a birthright. I made myself a cup of tea and carried it to the porch. The evening light spread across the sky like a soft, unbroken reflection, and I sat there for a long time, breathing in the gentle air. The world felt wider somehow, not because anything grand had happened, but because I had reclaimed the smallest, most essential thing, the right to my own life. That is the part of the story people often overlook, the way recovery does not announce itself loudly. It arrives in gentle breaths, steady mornings, and the quiet reassurance of choosing peace again and again. I do not know what path Tyler will take. I do not know if he will reflect on what he did or if he will continue moving through life with the same patterns he carried here. But I also know that his choices are no longer mine to soften or manage. My story did not end with his betrayal. It began with my decision to stop shrinking inside it. The house feels different now, lighter, warmer, more honest. When I walk through it, I feel my own presence in every room, not as a shadow behind someone else's decisions, but as a woman who has lived, learned, and chosen herself with gentle certainty. And as I sit here on the porch, watching the day fade into quiet evening, I understand something with a clarity that asks for no further proof. Strength does not always roar. Sometimes it arrives as a whisper that says, "This is my life, and I will live it on my terms." I did not understand the meaning then, but I do now.